Hello, so in this video I'm going to do revision for Edexcel A-level history, civil rights in the USA, 1850 to 2009, and this is for topic 3, which is all about the New Deal 1933 to 1941. So as with the other videos, I'm going to talk through the specification, then the timeline of the key events, then the content breakdown, and then go through the past questions that there have been on this topic. Okay, so starting off with the specification, there are 3 points. So first point is about the influence of Southern whites in the Democrat Party and really how they hindered any attempts by FDR and the government to address civil rights legislation. That FDR relied on the Southern Democrats for political support to get his New Deal through, and therefore was limited by the attitudes of the Southern Democrats. Point 2 is about the impact of the New Deal. So going through the different alphabet agencies and think about the impact they had on Black American civil rights and status and opportunity. And this idea as an overarching point for this, it's kind of the kind of pros and cons of the New Deal, that there was legislation that helped Black Americans and opportunities there, but then there was some limitations either within the legislation that was possibly, or it was discriminatory, or on a local level, the way that the welfare was given out was hugely kind of like discriminatory because of local attitudes. And then the final point is about the changing voting habits and how at the start of the period, Black Americans were predominantly Republican voters, and at the end of the period, they are predominantly Democrat voters. So the reasons kind of why that happened. One point is Eleanor Roosevelt and her symbolic support for Black American civil rights. For example, her relationship with Mary McLeod Bethune, or supporting Marian Anderson, supporting sharecroppers, these kind of acts of kind of symbolic support, talking with A. Philip Randolph. Also, you've got the kind of Black Cabinet, FDR's Black Cabinet, and the roles of Black Americans within his New Deal cabinet, and the idea that Black Americans saw that as, FDR was therefore a kind of ally, somebody to support. We've also got Executive Order 8802, which desegregated the armed industries in 1941 following a planned march on Washington by A. Philip Randolph. And also the positives of the New Deal, that actually a reason for Black Americans changing from Republican to Democrat was because of the New Deal policies. Okay, so now going into the timeline. So the topic starts in 1933, but it's important to know that before that we've had 1929 Wall Street crash, Great Depression. 1932 is the election of New Deal of FDR, when he wins the election in 32, and so he's inaugurated in 33. And then you get this huge raft of legislation, the alphabet agencies being implemented in 1933. 1934, NAACP are campaigning for an anti-lynching bill, which doesn't succeed, so you can use that as evidence of kind of limitations of support or the influence of Southern Democrats. Then 1935, you've got the second New Deal, so more legislation, Social Security Act and Wagner Act, which are to do with workplace rights. You've also got the National Youth Administration, the Works Progress Administration established, so more alphabet agencies. And those two particularly are quite positive in terms of the impact they have on Black Americans and the opportunities they provide. In 36, FDR wins for the second time. He wins a landslide, and this is a real turning point for Black American voting habits. 76% of Black Americans who voted for FDR, compared to the 70 who voted for Hoover, who was the Republican, in 1932. So this shift has happened. So within those 4 years, there's been quite a dramatic shift in voting habits. In 36, Marian Anderson sings at the White House, which is quite symbolically important. 37, There's another failure of anti-lynching bill, again showing the kind of power of the Southern Democrats at hindering Black American civil rights. 1938, we see the Fair Labor Standards Act. And Eleanor Roosevelt attends a Southern Conference on Human Welfare, again showing symbolic support for Black American civil rights. 1940, FDR is elected for the third term. And 1941, USA joins World War II. A. Philip Randolph's planned march on Washington leads to Executive Order 8802, which I mentioned before. And that's really, really important, actually, because that shows the power of Black American campaigning actually influencing government legislation. And it's the first time really since Reconstruction that there has been, Black American campaigns that has led to, government action in that way. You could say this is a forerunner to the later legislation of the 50s and 60s. Okay, so breaking down the content, motivating factors in this topic. You've got FDR and the New Deal. You could potentially break that down. FDR is one and the New Deal is another paragraph, or you could put them together. So FDR and the New Deal is one. You've also got Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt, I think the key word here, and I've mentioned it a few times, is this kind of symbolic support for Black Americans and Black American civil rights. Also, another motivating factor is Black American agencies. So the things that Black Americans themselves were doing to promote their civil rights, to advance their civil rights. So you've got the NAACP campaigns for the anti-lynching bills. You've got the Black Cabinet. You've got high-profile Black Americans like Mary McLeod Bethune, who have significant roles in alphabet agencies. So they would be the motivating factors I would highlight. What are the obstacles, the things that are hindering civil rights, holding back Black American civil rights? We've talked about Southern Democrats and the fact they wouldn't support, obviously, anti-lynching legislation. We've got FDR, and you could say that FDR didn't go far enough, to close loopholes in the alphabet agencies or some legislation. You could also link him to the Southern Democrats and talk about how he was reliant on the Southern Democrats for his New Deal policies and therefore was kind of hindered by them. Or you could say, he could have potentially done more. Whereas on the other hand, his wife was obviously very positive towards Black American civil rights, and he couldn't be as supportive. Another obstacle is white attitudes in the South, just a continuation of Jim Crow. And there's examples of kind of lynchings in this period, and just the discrimination on a local level, which I'll talk about in just a second, you could put under the category of kind of white attitudes that kind of limited and hindered Black American civil rights. Social, political, economic, we've got a continuation of Jim Crow, which is obviously a hindrance, but we've got opportunities from the New Deal in the alphabet agencies, and we've got symbolic support from Eleanor Roosevelt. Political, we've got voting restrictions remain. So in the South, Black Americans are largely disenfranchised, but we do have symbolic support from political leaders like Eleanor Roosevelt, some support from FDR as well. We've also got significant Black Americans getting involved in politics like Mary McLeod Bethune in alphabet agencies in the Black Cabinet. In terms of economic rights, we've got lots of support from New Deal agencies. Black Americans were disproportionately poor and therefore disproportionately likely to receive welfare. However, there was discriminatory practices, for example, redlining in the Fair Housing Act, and some jobs that were not covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act, like domestic work, for example, which disproportionately affected Black Americans. And as I mentioned before, discrimination on a local level, like at the TVA, where Black Americans weren't paid equally or didn't have equal treatment, equal facilities, and segregated facilities as well. Okay, now on to the past questions. So there's been 2 past essay questions on topic 3. And the first one, 2018. How far was the influence of Southern whites in the Democratic Party the chief cause of the failure to address the grievances of Black Americans during the New Deal years, 33 to 41? So this is an obstacles question. Paragraph 1 would be on the Southern Democrats. That's the That's what's in the question, the factor in the question. You could also talk about discrimination on a local level in the New Deal. That would be an issue that's caught a failure to address grievances. You could put that under kind of white attitudes possibly as well, and then possibly you could talk about FDR, and maybe he didn't go far enough, and then you could definitely link that, as I said before, to Southern Democrats. The second question, how accurate is it to say that New Deal brought no substantial change to the employment and working conditions of black Americans in the year 1933 to 41? It does talk about employment and working conditions, so that's quite narrow. You could potentially do this social, political, economic, and break it down that way. You could, I haven't written this here, you could potentially focus on some different alphabet agencies and focus on maybe 3 or 4 alphabet agencies and assess the extent to which they brought substantial change or not to the employment and working conditions of black Americans. So there's a couple of ways you could do that second question. So I hope that's useful. As ever, please let me know if there's anything that you need clarifying or any details of this that you need me to go into more detail. Just leave a comment. Thanks for listening.